The Zalari barely had time to blink before their war drone vanished, not shattered, not disabled, but utterly disintegrated. One moment, it hovered within its shimmering shield, and the next, a blinding flash consumed it. A shockwave rippled outward, causing the very walls of the observation deck to tremble. A stunned silence filled the chamber. The warlords who had been chuckling moments ago now stared, unblinking, at the empty space where their invincible drone had once been. Smoke and flickering embers were all that remained, drifting slowly toward the arena floor. The announcer's voice, once filled with condescension, stammered. The Zalari war drone has been, completely destroyed, by human weaponry. Murmurs spread like wildfire among the assembled alien dignitaries. Some leaned forward, as if their eyes had betrayed them. Others frantically checked their data consoles, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. One of the Zalari generals, his golden crest twitching with agitation, slammed his fist on the observation panel. This is a trick. The shields were not active. A Zalari technician, who had been monitoring the drone systems, swallowed hard and shook his head. The shields were at full power, sir. The readings confirm it. A deathly hush fell over the room. General Carter remained composed, hands clasped behind his back, as he finally broke the silence. I believe that concludes our demonstration. His voice was calm, but the subtle steel in his tone carried a message. You underestimated us, and now you see your mistake. A Zalari warlord stood abruptly, his tail lashing behind him. What was that? His voice was laced with barely concealed panic. That, he pointed a trembling claw at the smoldering remnants of the drone. That was not conventional weaponry. Carter gave a small, knowing smile. That was a railgun round. A solid tungsten projectile moving at hypervelocity. He stepped forward, meeting the warlord's gaze. No plasma. No antimatter. No energy discharge. Just mass, speed, and physics. The assembled aliens, many of whom had long dismissed humans as a minor species, now regarded the Earth delegation with something new in their eyes, fear. The Zalari warlord's mouth opened and closed, as if searching for a retort. But nothing came. A second soldier adjusted another weapon, a handheld prototype that had remained covered during the demonstration. Carter gestured toward it. Would you like us to test this one next? The warlords, still frozen in shock, did not answer. From the depths of the Galactic Union, whispers would soon spread. Human weapons were not just dangerous. They were unstoppable. The Zalari warlords remained frozen, their expressions flickering between disbelief and fury. The drone, their pinnacle of military engineering, was gone, erased in an instant. The humans had done the impossible, and now, for the first time in centuries, the Zalari felt something unfamiliar gnawing at their pride. Fear. General Carter remained calm, standing tall amidst the stunned silence. He didn't need to say anything. The smoking remains of the war drone spoke for him. Finally, one of the Zalari warlords, his scaled skin darkened with rage, slammed his clawed fist against the arm of his seat. This is a deception. The drone must have been sabotaged. Another warlord, his eyes narrowed, turned to his adjutant. Scan the wreckage. I want a full report on what happened. A nearby Zalari technician hesitated before responding, his voice unusually tight. Sir, there is no wreckage. The warlords blinked. What? The technician swallowed hard. There's nothing left. The impact, it completely vaporized the drone. There are no fragments. No internal components. It's just, gone. A murmur spread through the observation chamber. The gathered delegates of various alien species, who had been quick to dismiss humanity's weapons, were now whispering amongst themselves. The Zalari Supreme Warlord, whose golden crest had once shimmered with arrogance, now sat stiffly in his throne-like seat. His piercing yellow eyes bore into General Carter. "This changes nothing," he finally said, his voice carrying a forced authority. "One weapon does not win wars." Carter inclined his head slightly. "Of course not," he agreed smoothly. "One weapon does not win wars. But intelligence? Strategy? Innovation?" He let the words hang in the air before adding, "That does." Another Zalari warlord growled. "You believe yourself superior to us?" Carter's smile didn't waver. "I believe that underestimating humanity has always been a mistake. One that you and your people just experienced firsthand." The Supreme Warlord exhaled sharply through his nostrils, a low rumble in his throat. His warriors looked to him, waiting for a command. He knew this had become more than a demonstration. It was a challenge. His claws flexed against the arm of his seat. "Very well," he muttered. "We shall see how far your innovation goes. Humans have always been a primitive species that relied on brute force rather than true technological mastery. You may have caught us by surprise once. But war is not decided by a single strike." Carter simply nodded. "No, it isn't." Then, with an unreadable expression, he added, "But sometimes, it only takes one mistake to lose everything." The Supreme Warlord's eyes flashed with suspicion. Something about the general's confidence unsettled him. It was not the arrogance of a species that had gotten lucky, it was the certainty of one that knew exactly what was coming next. And that terrified him. Meanwhile, deep in space. Unbeknownst to the Zalari, the demonstration was just a warning shot. Elsewhere in the void, beyond their scanner's range, the real test was about to begin. Far beyond the edges of the Galactic Union's controlled space, an experimental human warship, the USV Nemesis, drifted silently in the darkness. Its hull was a sleek, matte black design, built to absorb light and remain hidden from conventional detection. Inside, Captain Lorna Graves watched her crew as they prepared for the next phase of the operation. "Status?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. A technician at the controls nodded. "Weapon is primed. Stealth systems are holding. The Zalari fleet hasn't noticed us." Graves exhaled slowly, nodding. "Good." She turned her gaze toward the vast expanse beyond the viewport. Floating in formation was a Zalari war battle group, one of their most powerful fleet detachments. It consisted of 4 dreadnoughts, 6 cruisers, and countless smaller escort ships. Each vessel bristled with weaponry that had devastated countless worlds. For centuries, the Zalari had ruled space unchallenged. Tonight, that was going to change. Graves activated her comm link. "This is Captain Graves to all personnel. We're proceeding with Phase 2. The command deck fell silent. On a screen before her, a single word blinked into existence, cold and final. The Zalari warlords had barely recovered from the shock of the demonstration when the true consequences of their arrogance began to unfold. General Carter remained composed, his expression neutral, as the Supreme Warlord scrutinized him. "You're stalling," the warlord finally said, his voice sharp with suspicion. "What are you hiding?" Carter exhaled slowly. "Nothing. I'm merely giving you time to make the right choice." A hush fell over the observation deck. Other alien delegates, once indifferent to the conversation, now leaned in, their gazes darting between the humans and the increasingly agitated Zalari leadership. The Supreme Warlord's claws twitched. And what right choice would that be, human? Carter met his gaze head-on. Standing down. A moment of stunned silence. Then, laughter. Deep, guttural, mocking laughter rippled through the Zalari warlords. "You believe a mere trick of technology entitles you to make demands?" one sneered. "You may have destroyed a drone, but you are insects before us." Carter's expression remained unreadable. He tapped a small device on his wrist, sending an unseen signal. Then, without warning, the entire station trembled. The warlords snapped their heads around, their laughter instantly silenced. The observation deck's lights flickered. A deep vibration rumbled through the walls. An alarm blared. "Report," barked the Supreme Warlord, turning to his aides. The Zalari technicians scrambled at their consoles, their expressions turning from confusion to pure panic. Supreme Warlord, one finally stammered. We've lost contact with our outer defense fleet." The Supreme Warlord's golden crest darkened in alarm. "What?" The technician's mandibles twitched. One moment, they were there. The next, nothing. Another technician gasped, his claws flying across the controls. "Scanning now, there's no debris, no explosion signatures, just void. It's as if they were erased." The observation deck fell into stunned silence. Then, Carter spoke. "You wanted to see our true weapons." He gestured toward the viewport, where the Zalari fleet had once been stationed. "Now you know." The Supreme Warlord turned back to the window, his eyes widening in horror. The fleet was gone. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Just, missing. As if it had never been there. Meanwhile, aboard the USV Nemesis, Captain Graves watched the screens as the last Zalari dreadnought blinked out of existence. "Phase 2 complete," reported her weapons officer. Graves allowed herself a tight smile. "Casualties?" "None, Captain. All Zalari ships have been neutralized without loss of life, as planned. Their crews won't even know what happened." A murmur of approval passed through the bridge. Graves nodded. "Good. Now, let's see if the Supreme Warlord is ready to talk." She activated her comms link to General Carter. "The demonstration is over, sir. It's time to negotiate." The observation deck remained deathly silent as the reality of the situation sank in. The Zalari warlords, once confident in their overwhelming military might, now stood frozen in disbelief. Their fleet, the pride of their empire, had not been destroyed in battle. It had simply ceased to exist. The Supreme Warlord's claws curled into fists. His breathing was heavy, his golden crest flaring erratically. "You lie," he finally snarled, pointing an accusatory talon at General Carter. "This is deception. A mere illusion." Carter remained impassive. He gestured toward the panicked Zalari technicians, who were still scrambling over their consoles, desperately trying to make sense of their readings. "If this were an illusion, wouldn't your own systems be able to detect the truth?" Carter asked. The Supreme Warlord turned toward the technicians, expecting a rebuttal. None came. Instead, the lead technician hesitated before finally whispering, "Sir, the readings are undeniable. The fleet is gone. No trace, no debris. Just void." The Supreme Warlord's mandibles twitched. "Impossible." Carter took a step forward, his voice firm but calm. "We are not your prey. We are not your playthings. You thought you understood human weapons. You were wrong." The other alien delegates, many of whom had once cowered before the Zalari, began whispering amongst themselves. Some cast wary glances toward the humans, while others looked at the Zalari with newfound skepticism. The balance of power in the room had shifted. For the first time in recorded history, the Zalari had been bested without a single human casualty. A desperate gamble. The Supreme Warlord's talons twitched. His mind raced for solutions, strategies, anything that could salvage his crumbling authority. Then, an idea struck him. "You think you've won, human?" he growled. "You believe this demonstration of power gives you leverage over us?" Carter didn't respond. He merely raised an eyebrow, waiting for the Zalari leader to reveal his next move. The Supreme Warlord straightened, his composure slowly returning. You may have eliminated my fleet, but your people are still vulnerable. We have armies, billions of soldiers. If you will not kneel, then we will do what we do best. His eyes gleamed with malice. We will burn your worlds. The other Zalari warlords hissed in approval. It was a gamble, one based on the assumption that humans couldn't retaliate quickly enough. That for all their technological prowess, they couldn't stop a planetary invasion once it had begun. But Carter didn't flinch. Instead, he sighed. You still don't understand. The Supreme Warlord's smirk faltered. Carter tapped his wrist device again. Captain Graves, proceed with the next phase. Aboard the USV Nemesis. Captain Graves stood at the command center, watching as the Zalari homeworld came into view on the main display. Coordinates locked, her weapons officer confirmed. Do it, Graves ordered. A single pulse of blue energy rippled out from the Nemesis, spreading across space like a wave. Within seconds, the Zalari homeworld's entire planetary communication grid collapsed. Every military outpost. Every fleet command center. Every planetary defense system. Silenced. Panic erupted across the Zalari world. Armies scrambled for orders that would never come. Generals screamed into dead calms. The once mighty empire was now blind and deaf. Back on the station, the Supreme Warlord's personal communicator went dark. His eyes widened in pure horror. Carter finally spoke. Your armies mean nothing if they have no orders to follow. The Supreme Warlord's mandibles quivered, his claws flexing in growing horror. Every attempt to re-establish communication with his homeworld was met with silence. He slammed a fist onto the console before him. Try again, he barked at his technicians. The Zalari operators frantically worked their controls, but the answer remained the same, nothing. Their homeworld was cut off, its once mighty command structure now in shambles. Across the observation deck, alien dignitaries whispered among themselves. Some looked in awe at the humans, while others cast uneasy glances, realizing they had grossly underestimated their species. General Carter remained still, his expression unreadable. Now do you understand? His voice was calm, but his words carried an undeniable weight. The Supreme Warlord turned, his sharp teeth bared in anger. What have you done? Carter tilted his head. Nothing irreversible, yet. He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving the Zalari leader. Your empire relied on its reputation, on fear. You crushed weaker species and never faced true resistance. You assumed our weapons were primitive, our strategies outdated. He let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. You were wrong. The Supreme Warlord's shoulders heaved as he fought against his growing panic. His entire species was at risk, not from death, but from irrelevance. Without their military supremacy, the Zalari would no longer dictate the rules of the galaxy. One of the younger Zalari warlords whispered, "What do we do?" A desperate plea. For the first time in their history, the Zalari weren't giving ultimatums. They were searching for a way out. The Supreme Warlord clenched his fists. He was left with two choices. Order a desperate counterattack with whatever forces remained, though against human technology, it would be suicide. Surrender and attempt to salvage what remained of Zalari influence. He exhaled sharply. What do you want, human? His voice was strained, the words foreign to his tongue. Carter let the question linger before replying. We don't want war. The Zalari warlords exchanged uncertain glances. Carter continued, his tone steady. We won't erase you from history, though we could. We won't conquer your worlds, though you've done so to countless others. He paused before delivering the final condition. But you will never threaten humanity, or any other species, again. The Supreme Warlord's claws twitched. His mind rebelled against the thought of submission. The Zalari had ruled unchecked for centuries. And now, one battle, without a single human casualty, had ended their dominance. "Accept these terms," Carter said, his voice unwavering, "or watch your empire collapse in real time." The Supreme Warlord's breath came in ragged gasps. He looked to his warlords, but none of them met his gaze. At last, with great reluctance, he lowered his head. The Zalari had lost. A turning point in galactic history. The decision sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Within days, the Zalari announced a formal ceasefire and withdrew their military presence from occupied worlds. Their former vassal species, long oppressed, now found themselves free. Meanwhile, humanity's standing changed overnight. Where once they were viewed as an upstart race, one that had barely set foot among the stars, they were now something else entirely. A force that even the strongest empire dared not cross. Yet, despite their power, humans did not seek to rule. Instead, they ensured balance. It was a lesson the galaxy would never forget. The Supreme Warlord sat motionless in the Zalari war chamber, his claws drumming nervously against the smooth surface of the negotiation table. Across from him, General Carter leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room was suffocating. The other Zalari warlords, once proud and unyielding, now sat subdued. Their empire had been shattered, not by war, but by the realization that humanity had surpassed them without breaking a sweat. For the first time in centuries, the Zalari found themselves in a position they had never considered, powerless. A bitter reckoning. One of the younger warlords finally spoke. "If we sign this treaty, we are nothing. The Zalari will be seen as weak. Our people will revolt." Carter's gaze was steady. "Then give them a different narrative." The Supreme Warlord let out a low growl, his pride warring with his reason. "Explain." Carter leaned forward. "You don't have to tell your people you surrendered. Tell them you saw a new opportunity, one that ensures the Zalari survive and thrive in a new galactic order." He let that sink in. "You still have economic power. You still have infrastructure. Use them, instead of your weapons." The Supreme Warlord's mandibles twitched in frustration. "You expect us to trade?" He spat the word like it was poison. "The Zalari have never been merchants." Carter smiled slightly. "Then adapt. Because war won't be an option anymore." The silent threat. The Supreme Warlord's mind raced. The implication was clear. If the Zalari ever raised their weapons again, humanity would wipe them from existence, without even firing a shot. But Carter never had to say it outright. That was the scariest part. A shift in galactic power. The Zalari had ruled through fear. Now, the galaxy feared humans more. Word spread like wildfire. Other alien civilizations, who had once dismissed humanity as unremarkable, were now re-evaluating everything. If humans could bring the mighty Zalari Empire to its knees without casualties, what else were they capable of? The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered, their voices filled with apprehension. "What do the humans want?" a reptilian diplomat asked nervously. A cybernetic species responded, their artificial eyes flickering. "That is what unsettles us the most. They do not demand territory. They do not ask for resources." A four-armed delegate from a neutral world leaned forward. "Then what do they seek?" Silence. No one had an answer. The human perspective. Back on Earth, in a secured military facility, General Carter stood before a massive screen. Behind him, a council of human officials watched intently. The Zalari had signed the treaty. Humanity's first true test against an interstellar empire had ended in total victory, without a single shot fired. An admiral turned to Carter. "They fear us now." Carter nodded. "Good. But fear alone won't last forever. Now we make sure they respect us. Another official frowned. And if they don't? Carter's expression hardened. Then we remind them. The galaxy had changed. Once, the Zalari Empire had ruled through fear and conquest, crushing weaker civilizations beneath their war fleets. Now, those same fleets lay silent, their weapons cold. The warlords had surrendered, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. And yet, the galaxy remained uneasy. If humans could destroy the Zalari without even fighting, what else could they do? The Galactic Council's final plea. On the neutral world of Valtiz 9, the Galactic Council convened in an emergency summit. Delegates from every major civilization gathered in the Grand Chamber, their voices low and anxious. A Zalari warlord, stripped of his former rank, stood before them. His once proud armor had been replaced with a simple diplomatic robe. He spoke with bitterness, but also with reluctant respect. The humans do not seek conquest. They do not demand tribute. They could have ended us, but they did not. He turned his gaze to the assembled leaders. That should terrify all of you. A murmuring spread through the chamber. The implications were clear. If humanity had wanted to, they could have taken the Zalari Empire for themselves. But they didn't. That made them even more dangerous. The representative of the Lutheri, a species known for its deep intelligence, finally spoke. So what do they want? Silence. Then, a soft voice cut through the tension. To be left alone. The entire chamber turned as a human entered. Humanity's message. The human delegate, Ambassador Keegan, walked calmly to the center of the chamber. He did not wear armor. He carried no weapons. And yet, every single alien in the room felt uneasy. Keegan's voice was steady. Humanity has never wanted war. We don't seek to rule anyone. We have no interest in galactic conquest. His eyes swept the chamber, locking onto each delegate. But understand this, we will never be victims. A cold shiver ran through the room. We have learned from history, Keegan continued. We know what happens to civilizations that refuse to stand up for themselves. We will not let that happen to us. He let that hang in the air before delivering the final, unspoken truth. Attack us once, and there won't be a second time. The final decision. The Galactic Council recessed for hours. Private meetings, hushed conversations, desperate calculations, all leading to a single conclusion. The Galactic Order had changed. Humanity was not just another species to be ignored or conquered. They were a force that had to be respected. By the end of the summit, a new treaty had been signed, one that recognized humanity's independence and sovereignty without challenge. And just like that, the galaxy had a new superpower. A future of peace, or caution. Back on Earth, General Carter watched the news reports roll in. Galactic Council formally recognizes human sovereignty. Zalari Empire officially steps down from military expansion. Fear or respect? The galaxy chooses diplomacy with humanity. Carter exhaled slowly. He knew this was just the beginning. The Zalari would never forget this humiliation. The other empires would watch humanity closely, wondering if the legends were true. And one day, inevitably, someone would test them again. But next time, there would be no warnings. Only consequences.